All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are diving deep into Reaganomics.
Reaganomics, yeah.
We've got a ton of sources to wade through.
Bog you.
Historical analyses, economic data.
Yep.
We even found some pretty strongly worded opinions from both sides of the aisle.
You always got to have both sides.
Exactly.
What I think is so interesting about this particular deep dive is that we're not just looking back.
Yeah.
We are connecting it to the present.
Mm-hmm.
The debates that these policies, Reagan's policies, ignited are still raging today. It's crazy.
Absolutely. Our mission, if you will, is to figure out not just what Reaganomics was, but like what its lasting impact has been.
Yeah.
And why this topic still sparks so many arguments.
It's crazy everywhere you go, every dinner table.
It's like the third rail of like political discussion, you know?
It is. Did it work or did it backfire? What's the deal?
Was it good? Was it bad? I don't know.
And to really understand it, I think we have to start with the economic mess of the late 1970s.
Okay.
So think like high inflation, high unemployment, and just this general feeling that America was losing its way.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It was a lot.
Our sources paint a pretty bleak picture of that time. It really sounds like people were struggling.
Oh, yeah.
And the government didn't have any answers. Like, nobody knew what to do.
And it wasn't just a feeling, you know?
Yeah.
Those struggles, you know, were reflected in some pretty scary numbers.
Like what?
So under President Carter, inflation reached double digits.
Oh.
Think about that impacting your grocery bill.
Yikes.
Yeah. And prime interest rates, you know, for loans hit 19%.
Ouch.
Yeah. So it made borrowing money incredibly expensive.
So it sounds like the U.S. economy was in a serious funk.
Oh, yeah.
And it seems like this context, like really understanding that is crucial for like understanding why Reagan's policies.
Yeah.
Which might seem kind of radical.
To us now?
To us now.
But it's seen as a potential solution back then.
Absolutely. The economic woes of the 70s just created this huge demand for change.
Yeah.
Drastic change for somebody to come in and just shake things up.
Right.
And that is where Ronald Reagan enters the picture with this bold new plan.
Reaganomics.
Reaganomics.
Thank God.
And he was a master communicator, don't forget.
Right.
He was a former actor.
Yeah.
He knew how to connect with people.
Right.
And he packaged this whole plan as this return to core American values.
Okay.
Self-reliance, free markets.
Okay.
Smaller role for the government.
Right.
He tapped into this like
a yearning.
Yeah, yearning for like simpler times.
Simpler times, yeah.
Like when things were better.
Yeah.
Or at least seemed better.
For some. For some. Definitely not for everybody. Yeah, for some.
Yeah. Okay. So let's unpack this. The core of Reaganomics.
Okay.
What are the pillars that define it?
So there are 4 pillars.
Okay. Number 1.
Tax cuts.
Ooh, tax cuts.
Yeah.
That seems to be a recurring theme.
A perennial favorite.
Yeah.
In conservative economic policies.
But what was Reagan's like specific approach to it?
He pushed for major reductions in taxes.
Okay.
Particularly for top earners and corporations.
Top earners and corporations. Okay.
And the idea was to incentivize investment.
Right.
And put more money in people's pockets.
Okay.
And then eventually the benefits would trickle down to everyone.
Trickle-down economics, right? That's what it's called.
That's what it's called.
But did Reagan ever actually use that term himself?
No, not really.
Okay.
Trickle-down was more of a label that was used by his critics.
Okay.
Reagan preferred to call it supply-side economics.
Supply-side economics. Okay.
And he emphasized the boost to production and job creation that he expected to see.
Okay.
There's actually a funny story, I don't know if it's true,
okay,
but where he quoted a 14th century scholar to make his point.
A 14th century scholar?
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
I know, right?
But like, why that particular scholar? Like, what does that tell us about his approach to economics?
Well, this scholar, Ibn Khaldun, emphasized the importance of low taxes for economic prosperity.
Okay.
And that aligned perfectly with Reagan's belief that individuals, not the government, are the real engine of economic growth.
Oh.
So it reveals how he, grounded his ideas in this historical philosophy of limited government.
Yeah.
And this strong emphasis on individual initiative.
So it wasn't just about cutting taxes.
Yeah.
It was about a fundamental shift in thinking about the role of government in the economy.
You got it.
Okay, on to pillar number 2.
All right.
Deregulation?
Deregulation.
What did that look like in practice?
So Reagan targeted industries like banking, airlines, energy.
Okay.
He wanted to roll back government oversight.
Okay.
Because he views all that regulation as a burden
okay.
on businesses.
Yeah.
And that it was stifling innovation and competition. The goal was to unleash the free market.
So less red tape, more freedom for businesses to operate.
That's it.
I can see the appeal.
Oh, yeah.
Especially for those who felt like the government was
meddling,
overstepping its bounds. Yeah.
Yeah.
But wasn't there a risk that this could lead to problems? Like if you just...
Oh, for sure.
Like completely deregulate everything?
Huge risks.
Yeah.
But we'll get into those later.
Okay, we'll get into that.
But the feeling at the time was that government was more the problem than the solution.
Right.
And Reagan really, really tapped into that.
All right, pillar number 3.
Yeah.
Decreased government spending.
Yeah.
Where did he target the cuts?
Well, his focus was on social programs.
Like what?
Like welfare, food stamps,
Okay.
job training.
Okay.
He saw these programs as creating dependency.
Right.
And argued that private charities and state governments could handle social welfare more efficiently.
And this is where things get really politically charged.
Oh, yeah,
right?
sure.
Cutting social programs, especially for people in need, is always controversial.
Yeah, and there was this one cut that became really symbolic of this whole controversy.
What was it?
Ketchup as a vegetable issue.
Ketchup as a vegetable?
As a vegetable.
What? That sounds ridiculous. What was the reasoning?
So to be fair,
okay,
it wasn't quite as simple as just like ketchup is now a vegetable.
Okay.
But as part of this effort to cut costs in the school lunch program, the USDA, under Reagan's direction, proposed these changes to nutritional guidelines that would allow ketchup to count as a serving of vegetables.
Oh, interesting.
I know, right?
So I guess that highlights how far they were willing to go to reduce government spending.
For sure.
Even if it meant making some, questionable choices.
Some interesting choices, yeah.
Okay, on to the 4th and final pillar.
All right.
Tight money supply.
Ooh, that one sounds a little...
That one sounds technical.
Yeah.
Can you break that down a little?
So this refers to the Federal Reserve's role in controlling inflation.
Okay.
Reagan appointed Paul Volcker as Fed chair.
Okay.
And Volcker was known for his commitment to fighting inflation.
Okay.
Even if it meant short-term economic pain.
So how did Volcker actually tackle inflation?
So he took some very aggressive action.
Okay.
He significantly raised interest rates.
Okay.
Which made borrowing more expensive, slowed down spending, and ultimately helped bring inflation under control.
Okay, so raising interest rates has this ripple effect throughout the economy, right?
Absolutely.
So what were some of the other consequences
You're right.
of Volcker's actions?
It made it much harder for businesses to borrow money.
Okay.
Which contributed to that recession of the early 80s.
Right.
So it was a classic example of a trade-off.
Yeah.
Short-term economic downturn in exchange for long-term price stability.
Right. So we've got the context of the 70s.
Yeah.
The 4 pillars of Reaganomics.
Yep.
And I think some hints at the complexities and controversies surrounding these policies.
A lot of controversies.
But the big question remains, did Reaganomics work?
Well, that is what we'll unpack next.
Ooh.
The story of Reaganomics is really a story of 2 narratives.
Okay.
2 very different interpretations of the same events.
Oh, okay.
Buckle up.
I'm ready.
This is where things get really interesting.
Okay. Yeah. I can't wait. Okay, so we've laid all the groundwork.
The groundwork, yeah.
The economic storm of the 70s, the 4 pillars, those little hints of controversy.
Well, for controversy.
But let's get to the heart of it.
Yeah.
Did these policies actually deliver?
That is the million-dollar question.
It is.
And as I mentioned, there are 2 main narratives.
Right.
You've got, on the one side, the people who hail the Reagan recovery as this resounding success.
The Reagan recovery, okay.
The Reagan recovery, yeah.
So walk us through that side of the story. What evidence do they point to?
Well, they point to the period of economic expansion that followed that brutal recession of the early 80s.
Okay.
I mean, we're talking the longest peacetime expansion that the U.S. had seen up to that point.
Wow, okay.
GDP growth soared. Tons of jobs were created. Unemployment fell. Even the median household income saw a boost. And there's even this story, I don't know if it's apocryphal.
Okay.
But it's about a German chancellor asking Reagan about the American miracle at some economic summit.
Interesting. So it sounds pretty impressive.
It does.
But you said there were 2 narratives. So what's the other side of the coin?
The other side...
What do the critics focus on?
Well, the critics say that the so-called miracle wasn't all it was cracked up to be.
Okay.
They point to the fact that the national debt tripled under Reagan.
Oh, okay.
Remember those tax cuts that increased military spending?
Right.
Those things contributed significantly to the deficit.
So they were concerned about the long-term consequences of those policies.
Like a buy now,
buy now, pay later kind of approach.
Exactly. And they also really highlighted the issue of income inequality.
Right.
While the economy as a whole was growing, the benefits weren't exactly shared equally.
Yeah.
The richest Americans saw their incomes just skyrocket during this time,
Wow.
while a lot of working-class families actually experienced a decline in their real wages.
So it becomes this debate about growth versus equality.
Yeah.
Was the economic pie getting bigger, but the slices were becoming more uneven?
You got it.
Is that a fair assessment?
I think that's a really great way to frame it.
It's interesting.
And it's a debate that we're still having today, by the way.
It's true.
How do we define economic success?
Right.
Is it just about overall growth?
Right.
Or do we also need to think about how that growth is distributed?
Across society.
Across society, exactly.
Yeah, those are tough questions.
They are.
With no easy answers.
No easy answers.
It's fascinating to me how, economic policies can have such far-reaching effects.
Totally.
Shaping not just our wallets, but, our values and beliefs about the role of government.
Absolutely right. And the legacy of Reaganomics is still unfolding today.
It's true.
I mean, think about it. Many of those core ideas, the tax cuts, deregulation, a smaller role for government, those are all still central to conservative economic thinking.
So even though Reagan left office decades ago, his ideas are still shaping these discussions today.
All the time.
That's so interesting. Could you give us some examples of how this plays out?
Oh, yeah.
In the current political landscape?
Sure. So think about the ongoing debates that we're having about the role of government.
Okay.
In addressing issues like income inequality.
Right.
Should the government step in to try to level the playing field?
Yeah.
Or should it take a more hands-off approach?
Right.
What about regulation?
Right.
Should industries be really tightly regulated?
Yeah.
To protect consumers and the environment? Or does that stifle innovation and economic growth?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, these are all questions that have their roots in the Reagan era.
Yeah, it's almost like we're still wrestling with the consequences of choices made back then.
Yeah, for sure.
But what about, we touched on this earlier, the air traffic controllers strike?
Oh.
Well, how did that event fit into the bigger picture of Reaganomics?
Well, I think that was a really pivotal moment in his presidency.
Okay.
Because it was about more than just a labor dispute.
Right.
It was really a symbolic showdown between his administration and organized labor.
Right.
It really showcased his commitment to reducing the power of unions.
Okay, but wasn't the national debt already on the rise before Reagan took office?
Yeah, that's true.
So, how much of the increase can we attribute to his policies?
Well, that's a valid question.
Yeah.
The national debt was increasing.
Right.
But Reagan's policies, specifically the combination of tax cuts and increased military spending, really accelerated that trend.
Okay.
Dramatically, I would say.
So it was already happening, but...
It was already happening, but it got a lot worse.
Okay, interesting. It seems like with Reaganomics, there are so many layers. So many different perspectives on its impact.
It's complicated.
It's complicated.
Yeah.
What about deregulation? Did that have any, unintended consequences?
Oh, certainly.
What?
So while the goal of deregulation was to stimulate the economy, it also created this environment where some industries kind of took advantage of the looser rules.
Right.
And sometimes that led to some pretty disastrous consequences.
Do you have a specific example of that?
Sure. One really clear example is the deregulation of the savings and loan industry in the 80s.
Oh, okay.
This led to just a wave of risky lending practices.
Oh, wow.
And ultimately a massive crisis that cost taxpayers billions of dollars to clean up.
Billions. Wow.
It really raised these serious questions about finding the right balance between freeing up markets and protecting consumers.
Sounds like a classic case of too much of a good thing.
That's a great way to put it.
But getting back to the Reagan recovery.
Yeah.
Did everyone benefit equally from that period of economic growth?
Unfortunately, no, not at all.
Okay.
One of the, I think, most significant criticisms of Reaganomics is that it exacerbated income inequality.
Right.
The gap between the rich and the poor widened considerably.
During that period.
Yeah, can I throw some numbers at you?
Sure, yeah, put some numbers on it. How much did the gap actually increase?
Okay, so during the 1980s, the top 1% of earners saw their incomes skyrocket.
Okay.
While the bottom 20% experienced little to no gains.
So it wasn't just about the overall size of the pie. No. It was about who was getting the biggest slices.
You got it.
And this gets to the heart of, some of the most contentious debates about Reaganomics.
Yeah.
Was it a success if it lifted the economy overall but left a lot of people behind?
Right.
That's a great point. It seems like any evaluation of Reaganomics has to grapple with those questions of fairness and equity.
Absolutely.
But before we get too philosophical, let's zoom out a little bit.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground, the two narratives.
The
debate over the debt.
Yeah.
The impact of deregulation. The income inequality issue.
It's a lot.
And
it's important to remember that all of these issues, they're not just abstract economic concepts.
Right.
They have real human consequences.
Of course.
They affect people's lives.
Yeah.
Their families, their communities.
Absolutely. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Right.
They represent real people's experiences.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
okay,
I want to circle back to something you said earlier.
Sure.
That the legacy of Reaganomics is still unfolding.
It is.
So as we move into the final part of our deep dive,
okay,
I'm wondering how we can connect all of this to the present moment.
Yeah.
What lessons can we draw from Reaganomics as we face the economic challenges?
The challenges of the 21st century.
That is the crucial question.
It is.
And one that we'll explore in more depth next.
I can't wait. Okay, so we've really dug deep into Reaganomics.
We really have.
The context, the policies, all the intended and unintended consequences.
All of it.
But as we wrap up this deep dive,
the
big question still remains.
It does.
What does this all mean for us today?
That is the most important question, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, understanding the past is about equipping ourselves to navigate the present and the future.
Right. So given everything we've learned, how should we, think about approaching similar economic challenges in the 21st century?
Right. Well, think back to those two competing narratives about the Reagan recovery.
Okay.
One was focused just on economic growth.
Yeah.
And the other emphasized the uneven distribution of those gains.
Right.
I think it highlights this really fundamental tension that we're still grappling with today.
So it's that balance between promoting economic growth and ensuring that the benefits are shared widely.
Yeah, that seems like a really tough balance to find.
It is.
If you focus too much on growth, you risk leaving people behind.
Right.
But if you prioritize redistribution too much, you could stifle economic activity.
Exactly. And there are no easy answers.
Right.
But I think one of the key takeaways from Reaganomics is that we have to be mindful of the potential trade-offs. We need to think really carefully about the long-term consequences of policy choices.
Not just the short-term gains.
Not just the short-term gains,
So what would that look like in practice? How can we apply these lessons to the challenges we face today, like rising inflation or debates over government spending?
Right. Well, for one thing, we have to acknowledge that there are a lot of different levers that policymakers can pull to influence the economy.
Yeah.
Reaganomics really focused on tax cuts and deregulation as the primary tools for stimulating growth.
Right.
But as we saw, those tools can also have unintended consequences.
Like the savings and loan crisis.
Exactly.
Okay.
So maybe we need a more diversified toolkit.
Okay.
One that recognizes the importance of public investment.
Okay.
In areas like education, infrastructure, scientific research.
Yeah.
Alongside a thoughtful approach to regulation that balances the need for innovation with consumer protection.
So finding that sweet spot, not going to extremes.
That's a great way to put it,
Okay.
And it requires a willingness to engage in thoughtful debate.
Right.
To consider different perspectives and to recognize that there isn't always one right answer.
It's also important to remember that the economic landscape has changed a lot.
Oh, it has.
Since the Reagan era.
Dramatically.
Yeah. I mean, we're dealing with globalization, technological disruption.
Climate change?
Climate change, yeah.
Big time.
Challenges that Reagan couldn't have foreseen.
He couldn't have.
So while the lessons of Reaganomics are valuable, we can't just apply them wholesale to the present.
No. We have to adapt our thinking
to
the realities of the 21st century.
So maybe it's less about specific policy prescriptions and more about a way of thinking. Like a framework for approaching these complex issues.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
We have to be willing to learn from the past, both the successes and the failures, but also be open to new ideas and innovative solutions.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And for our listeners, I think that's a great takeaway.
What's that?
To approach these debates with curiosity.
Okay.
With a willingness to listen to different viewpoints.
Yeah.
And with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, these aren't just abstract economic theories.
Right.
They have real-world consequences for people's lives.
So let's end this deep dive with a challenge for our listeners.
Okay, I like it.
As you encounter these economic debates in your daily lives, in the news, on social media, maybe even at your own dinner table.
Oh, yeah.
Think about the lessons we've discussed today.
Reese.
Remember the complexities.
The complexities.
The trade-offs.
Yeah.
The unintended consequences.
All of it.
Because we have the power to shape our economic future.
We do.
It starts with asking the right questions.
Yeah.
Engaging in thoughtful debate and demanding solutions that work for all of us.
Well said. I couldn't have said it better myself.
And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into Reaganomics.
It's been a journey.
It has.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, and until next time.
Until next time.
Keep exploring.
Keep questioning.
Keep questioning and keep learning.
And keep diving deep.
And keep diving deep. All right. Bye, everybody.
See ya.